Hello everyone, so welcome back. I'm Yogi Doug Johnson, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about emotions versus triggers. Okay, so emotions versus triggers. This is our discussion today. And before I get into the topic, as always, I want to thank all my patrons on Patreon. They make these talks possible, so if you're watching this for free on YouTube, please know that it's not just me offering this. It's actually a community of people online who support me in doing this work. So they really are the ones that collaborate with me, if you will, who allow me to do this. If you'd like to join that community, then please check out the links in the description below. Okay, so emotions versus triggers. What is the difference? It's important to recognize the difference, actually. And this is my latest understanding of this topic, which has evolved some, but largely has remained the same, more or less the same. So I think this is important to talk about from time to time, because it's really important that we, if we're awake and we want to deepen that awakening and we want to understand the human experience, then we need to be able to differentiate between an emotion that is appropriate for a situation versus a trigger that is not appropriate, and what that means, why do we have triggers, where do they come from. So hopefully this will shed some light on that. So an emotion is a response to a situation. It's a contraction or a feeling that we have inside of our body that motivates us to do something, right? Emotion, so motion, it's something that motivates us, it's something that moves us. So, for instance, if I have, in a situation, I feel uncomfortable about what's going on, I might try and leave or exit that situation if I get a feeling in my gut or something like that. If I feel nervous in a certain situation, that might motivate me again to make certain decisions or certain choices. So, emotions, I don't think, are bad things inherently. They are necessary. They are what motivates us, moves us through the world. Without them, we would essentially be robotic. And additionally, I think our experience of the world would be much less rich. So from this perspective, I'm embracing the perspective that the Taoists take, which is that all human emotions are legitimate. In their normal state, in their healthy state, they are actually good for us. So, for instance, I think in spirituality, a lot of times anger is painted as just a negative thing that we want to completely get rid of or eliminate. And this is a belief that I've held before, and my current thinking on it is I'm not so sure, because I've had some experiences recently where what we could call anger rose up in a situation and actually helped to move that situation forward in a healthy way. Now, that's important because very often I think anger is not actually justified. It's actually not going to move a situation forward in a healthy way. It's just going to make a situation worse. And so a lot of times the ego will try to justify anger. And that's one way is you're sort of justifying it. That's one way you probably know that that isn't actually a spontaneous response to a situation that's actually healthy. If you're, well, she said that, she did this, they did that, that's why I got angry. The ego's always trying to justify its position, its perspective. in my experience, which again, I don't get angry that often, but when this happened, the experience was that this energy rose up very intensely. It was a strong response to a situation. And this is a situation that I had tried to resolve without anger. But at a certain point, this anger just came up, it rose up, it was very intense. And then, as quickly as it came up, it was completely gone. And the person who I was interacting with, I didn't feel like they needed to apologize for their words or actions. There was no grudge that was being held. There was no sort of, you need to change or fix this or whatever. It was a very just sort of spontaneous thing that came up and then went away, and it shifted the interaction, again, in a positive way, which was interesting to me. And again, this is why my experience and my ideas of this changed, or have changed recently. Because I think for a long time, and some of you may have even heard me say in class before, like, when is anger going to actually help resolve a situation or move a situation in a positive direction? The truth is, usually it doesn't. Probably 9 times out of 10. And a lot of us get angry for a lot of different situations. And again, what I'll say is most of that anger is actually a trigger, not an emotion. So a positive emotion like anger can help us set boundaries, healthy boundaries, right? Where sort of like, here's the healthy limit of what I'm willing to accept. And again, this isn't an intellectual exercise. This isn't, because again, I think very often the intellect is involved with these triggers and these things. My experience of this anger was, it was very organic, and it came up on its own, and it wanted to be expressed and to be felt, and it just came up, and like I said, it went away as quickly as it came up, and there was no sort of grudge or needing for an apology or anything like that. I had a similar experience with grief with my father, or sadness, or however you want to think of that. Some of you know my father passed away early on in the pandemic. He caught COVID fairly early on, and we all thought he would recover. He's generally a pretty healthy, he was a pretty healthy gentleman for his age especially. He was in that at-risk group, but he didn't have diabetes or a lot of the other comorbidities, so we thought he would get better, but he didn't, and he ended up passing away. And I was very curious, how would the awakeness deal with the loss of my father? How would awareness, how would my true identity experience that loss? What would that be like? Because again, what we often see in our culture, and I think in every culture, in many cultures, is we lose someone we love, and there is this prolonged grieving process and this prolonged sense of having lost something or someone. There's just this, it goes on, and if you bring up that person's name a year or 2 or 3 or 4 later, you start breaking down and crying. And my experience was very different. It was very interesting. And again, I really didn't know what would happen. My experience was, I had a very, very intense sense of grief, sadness, but interestingly, loss did not express what I was experiencing. So it was interesting to me because many people, and again, this is just sort of cultural norms. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad or say that anyone did anything wrong. But in the days after my father passed away, and it was known to people, pretty much everyone's response was, "I'm sorry for your loss." And, again, I understand why people would say that. It was interesting because I didn't feel I'd lost anything. And it's hard to explain, but I felt very much like that which my father was still with me. I knew his body, he had passed away, his body was gone. I knew I couldn't call him and talk to him anymore. But there wasn't a sense of loss. It was like what my father was very much still with me. And in fact, I felt almost like he was with me more, because when he was embodied, it was like, I knew his body was over there and I'm over here, and I have to pick up the phone to talk with him or be with him. After his passing, there was a very strong sense that he was always with me. And I don't mean like his ghost was with me, or again, I'm not talking about any kind of weird woo-woo, his spirit was hanging around me or anything like that. Maybe, I don't know. But I didn't get that sense. It's just what my father was, his true nature, what he really was not diminished at all by the death of his physical form. So again, maybe some people on a spiritual path, think that human emotions are a sign that we are not fully enlightened, or like we have something missing or something like that. This isn't my experience. My experience of awakening and what this path is really about is being fully human, not denying the human, which some people in spirituality, that is their interpretation of what enlightenment is somehow we become something other than human. So again, there's a lot of this in spirituality. People will follow teachers who supposedly have levitated or done spontaneous healings, or have astral projected their body someplace, all these sorts of amazing things. And I'm not saying these things don't happen. I'm not saying that that these things mean that those teachers are illegitimate or there's something wrong with them. But in the Zen tradition, they very much emphasize that even if special powers should appear, that those are not what enlightenment is really about. That's not really what Zen is about. And there is a sort of a Zen saying, chopping wood and carrying water. So one disciple once asked his master, what is Zen? What is enlightenment? What is the way? And the teacher replied, chopping wood and carrying water. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's sort of like doing your laundry and doing the dishes. That would be the modern day equivalent of it. Or going to your job and sitting in traffic. That would be another way that I could make a modern equivalent of you ask me, well, what is enlightenment? What is all this about? It's about really being fully in your body and in your life. And so when we start getting obsessed with superpowers, with altered states of reality, we're missing the point. And this is very important because I have worked with several world famous yoga teachers who were obsessed with these types of things. They very much thought yoga was about altered states of consciousness and reality, about being able to maybe, project yourself into any space or time, that this is really important, this is what it's about. And as a result, they sort of viewed themselves as somehow, lacking in the spiritual department. Like And they looked down on teachers who didn't have these qualities or achieve these sorts of things. So in my teaching, I've distinguished between mystical states and spirituality. So mystical states are things like, I'm experiencing a nothingness in my meditation, or I'm experiencing pure bliss and love, or I'm experiencing oneness with all things. All these types of wonderful, blissful states that we experience. Wonderful, that's great, that's beautiful. But you notice that the Zen teacher did not reply when the student said, "What is Zen?" Did not reply, "Oh, a sense of oneness with all things." He said, "Chopping wood and carrying water." Very unglamorous, right? Doing your dishes. An unglamorous thing. Not, an experience of oneness with all things. Because this is what I find many people in spirituality are chasing, is this idea of what they think bliss is, or a very limited experience of bliss, joy, peace, and they don't realize that these states are accessible when doing dishes, when doing laundry, when sitting in traffic. So this is very important to understand, okay? So again, these two examples are examples I'm bringing from my own life, that I have experienced anger in situations that was appropriate to the situation. I think in the past, again, I might have seen that as a sign of weakness or a sign of ignorance, but again, there was no suffering around it, and this is an important thing, and I may do a separate talk about suffering and pain and these types of things, but this energy just came up and then it went down and it moved the situation forward, despite, you might say, my ego thinking that, this is a disaster. You shouldn't be angry in this situation, right? Because my ego's there thinking that it needs to control everything, and it thinks it knows everything, and it thinks it knows that anger is never justified, that anger is never a good response to a situation. But this is something that I've picked up from, again, other human beings or a spiritual tradition, different things. But in my own experience, I have found that there have been situations where that was actually helpful. Very interesting to me. Observing that, being like, oh wow, that actually moved things in a significant way. Then say, again, with my father, my grief, it came up, it was very intense, and then it settled. And I can still sometimes feel sadness, with knowing that my father, I can't call him or connect with him. There are times when I sense his physical absence. But overall, there's not been a sense that anything is being repressed. The feeling was, the sadness came up, it was super intense. I cried my eyes out. And then again, it very naturally fell away. And what's very important to understand about those experiences is I allowed myself to feel the emotion fully and completely, and to allow it to express itself. So in those two instances, I think the emotion matched the situation, okay? That the human experience that I was having elicited a healthy emotional response. And that's what an emotion, that's what I'm calling an emotion. Now, how does this differ from, say, a trigger? A trigger happens because we, usually when growing up, we learn that certain emotions are not allowed. Certain things are not allowed, like maybe sadness. We're not allowed to be sad. Our parents might, if we're sad or crying, our parents might say something like, "I'll give you something to cry about if you keep crying." right? That happened to me. So that you may have had a similar situation where you are made to feel ashamed, guilty, or even threatened with physical violence if you continue to express sadness over something, okay? So we learn, okay, I'm not allowed to be sad. I can't cry. I need to take that emotion and push it down. What's important about this to understand is from the tantric yogic perspective, which focuses on energy, an emotion is a movement of energy within us, okay? It's again a response to a situation. And when it's not distorted, I think the natural thing that happens is the response matches the situation, okay? What happens when we repress those emotions, those energies, they don't go away. So if you've ever been angry, but not allowed yourself to feel that anger and perhaps even express that anger, then if you've not properly dealt with that energy, then that energy is simply repressed. Now, this doesn't mean that it is appropriate or okay for us to go around always expressing our emotions. There are situations where we simply cannot do that, perhaps at our job. That maybe is not the best time for us to break down crying or to start yelling and screaming if we are angry about something. But this is one of the reasons why I teach the meditation that I teach. And again, if you're a student of mine, you know not all meditations are created equal. So the meditation that I teach is something that you would do most likely on a daily basis. And this would be the time where you really allow yourself to fully experience the energy of whatever emotion wanted to arise. And many of you have probably experienced this, that when you sit down for your meditation, if there was an interaction earlier in the day or the day before, earlier in the week, where there's some kind of unresolved energy, emotion, right? Something that felt like it didn't really quite go the right way, you probably find it coming up in your meditation. I think this is normal and this is generally healthy. And if you understand the way I teach meditation, that allows those emotions that were maybe temporarily repressed to be processed fully and completely. When you do not process them, when you repress them and then you do not, in meditation, allow yourself to fully experience that and witness that energy, it stays down there, okay? And so this is what most of us learn to do. When we're young, we learn certain things are not okay. You know, again, sadness or anger, sometimes even joy, right? We may have parents who felt like they had a lot on their shoulders, and it actually angered and triggered them to see, you know, their children having fun and enjoying themselves. And, you know, there have been some parents who are like, look, you know, life isn't about having a good time, so you need to stop, you know, playing and get your chores done and, you know, stop being so happy about everything. And or it's not even that conscious. They may just react and hit their child or punish them, again, to kind of silence them and push that away because it's such a emotional dissonance. You know, the weight that the parent is feeling and the depression or anxiety versus the child's just pure joy and bliss. They just want to shove that away, right? The old expression that misery loves company. So this can show up. So anyway, when we don't address the emotions sooner or later, right, when we just keep pushing them down, what happens is we're creating sort of like a powder keg. We're just taking all that energy and we're shoving it down into this container within us. And sometimes that's called the subconscious or the unconscious. So we're shoving things down into this container more and more and more. And It might seem like we're happy and healthy people, but then what can happen is in a certain situation, there is what's called a trigger. And what the trigger is it's something that elicits that emotion that we've packed down. Okay, so let's say I packed down anger because when I was young, I learned that, I wasn't able to express anger. And then a situation arises that makes me angry. Now, if I learn that I can't feel or express anger, I may not express anger, but it may come up in some other way. And this is what I call a distortion. So the energy is coming up. It's not allowed its most natural avenue because of, again, the repression. You might have learned you had to repress things. So then it may divert into another emotion. So for instance, maybe self-loathing or depression or anxiety or some other unhealthy emotion. And so in the individual, there may be no recognition or connection between that. But you might find yourself in certain situations, again, in a situation that maybe should have elicited anger. And again, anger doesn't always need to be a big show, a big volcano, right? We can simply say, that's really upsetting to me, and, I would prefer you not to do this or that or whatever. We can express anger without yelling and screaming. So I don't want you to think that it always needs to be a big explosion of emotion. Again, just setting healthy boundaries is one way that this energy, this same sort of energy, expresses. So again, if it's not allowed to express, we might find ourselves, we get in an argument with someone we love, and then we go into, again, a response that isn't really matching the situation. We get overly upset or overly depressed, or again, we may not be able to express anger, but we might walk away from a situation, right? That might be one way that we've learned to deal with, that person upsets me, so I'm going to break up with them, or I'm going to leave this conversation or walk away. Or again, sometimes these emotions turn inward on self-hatred. Oh, I got upset with this person. I hate myself for getting upset, or whatever it is. So hopefully you're understanding what I'm saying, that a trigger is something, a situation that elicits a response that is not appropriate to the situation. It can be both the emotion that's elicited isn't appropriate, and it can also be that the amount of emotion is not what is required to communicate what's there. So again, some people might get very, very angry when they're triggered, and it's like this huge explosion, and it's just more than is necessary to communicate with another person. So we might be yelling and screaming at somebody, and they can hear us fine, and the yelling and screaming isn't making our point. Once again, when I got angry recently, again, it was to my surprise that actually the amount of energy and expression was necessary to actually sort of break through to the other person. And again, that was as much a surprise to me as anybody. And it was after looking back saying, oh wow, this was really interesting that this was the case. So hopefully this is making sense to you, that anger or whatever it is that we're repressing, there can be an appropriate emotional response: sadness, joy, anger, whatever it is. That the full range, my experience is the full range of human emotions are, like the Taoists say, healthy and can be appropriate in different situations. Again, going back to the Zen tradition, we find many examples of teachers acting in what we might see as violent or aggressive or angry ways toward their disciples. But what the story always concludes with is that's what the disciple needed to wake up, and the disciple woke up as a result of that. Now, again, my experience of that is it's not calculated. So again, egos are thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe if I'm, mean to this person, then they'll wake up. Or if I say this to that person, then they're going to get it or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about here. Again, my experience with these is it's a very natural, organic, arising in the moment. There isn't any premeditation to it. Okay? It's not a plan. It's not something I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, you know what, I'm going to get really pissed at this person, and then that's going to move this situation forward. Rather, what I have tried to do with these practices that I'm sharing with you and these techniques is clear myself out. If you haven't watched my talk about the hollow bamboo, then you can go back and watch that. This is what I'm talking about. What wants to play through this vessel? How does the divine want to play on this vessel? And what I've tried to do is remove my ego and that kind of premeditativeness and that manipulation and control that the ego demands in every situation. I need to control my emotions. I need to control my anger. I need to control that person. I need things to go a certain way. And as you let go of that more and more through these practices, you may begin to experience these very spontaneous responses to things. I think some of you have heard me share a story of being at a training where a woman took very unkindly to a situation that I was a part of, basically. And I could see that she was really taking this personally and taking it hard. And I said, hey, give me a hug, this isn't personal. And she said no. And she was very, very upset and angry at me. And, it was okay. There was nothing I could do about it. I just could offer her that hug, and she didn't want it. And about 24 hours later or so, I think she saw what was happening and how it wasn't personal, and I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just really trying to help a group out, and many people in that group actually thanked me for what I said. And I think after the fact she saw that, and then eventually she came back and apologized. She was crying, and I said, are you ready for that hug? And again, in my experience, that was, and when I hugged her, I actually said, I love you, right? And this is someone who's essentially a stranger to me. But those words were not personal. And this is what I'm trying to help communicate to you, okay? It wasn't the love that I, have for my father. It wasn't the love that I have for my partner. It wasn't a personal love. This was a transcendent love. But that spontaneously came out of my mouth as I was, hugging this person. And I meant it. And again, it wasn't premeditated. I didn't sit there thinking, maybe if I tell her I love her, this will melt her heart and she'll feel so much better or whatever. That wasn't how it went. But it was very beautiful, because for the rest of that training, she sat by me, and there that tension was completely gone. So again, this is what is possible for us. This spontaneous, the system actually spontaneously working as it's meant to work. This can't happen if we have a lot of this pent up energy in us that comes from repression. So again, we need to be really careful, because Some people might hear this and start thinking that every time they get angry, it's justified and it's appropriate for the situation, or every time they get sad, that's justified and appropriate for the situation. For most people, unless you've done a lot of work on yourself, I'm not even going to say meditation, because there's a lot of meditations that actually encourage you to repress your emotions, not release them. There are a lot of meditations and spiritual techniques that actually propagate you repressing your emotions, your traumas, all the difficult stuff in an attempt to be more spiritual and holy and all of this stuff. It's not the topic of today's discussion, so I don't want to get too deeply into it, but this is something that I've seen a lot in spirituality, is trying to deny our human experience in favor of some transcendent experience. But our true nature is just as interested in the human as it is the transcendent. So this isn't about rejecting one experience in favor of another. If you go into transcendental meditation, I'm not talking about TM, by the way, so I'm not talking about a specific type of meditation. I'm just talking about transcendence, okay? This experience of transcendence where we transcend the ego and we transcend our personal boundaries. Very blissful, very enjoyable. And many people who experience that then get confused and think that that's what spirituality is about. Maybe there are certain traditions and that's all it's about. And if that's what you're looking for, you're in the wrong place. Because my experience is that we can have those experiences, but those are also just arisings within our true nature. This teaching is about fully knowing our true nature and then fully embodying our human experience. Okay, if you are someone who is living in an astral realm and astral projecting and doing all that, go look for a teacher there, right? Why come to a human teacher, an embodied teacher, to learn about that stuff? Why not just go off there and spend all of your time there? So the Zen tradition that my roots are in, and very much influenced the way that I teach yoga, because for me, Tantra and Zen are really pointing to the same thing. And I'm not the only teacher who thinks that way. So this is about full embodiment. Body, mind, heart. The full human experience, which is a very rich and intense experience. But most of us don't realize how we are generating or creating our own suffering. So triggers and understanding your triggers and knowing when you're triggered is an extremely valuable thing to learn, okay? So again, once we've cleared our triggers, it doesn't mean we won't experience emotions. It doesn't, in my experience, even mean we won't experience anger from time to time, okay? But again, it's probably going to be rare. My experience is mostly joy and bliss and peace, and other emotions like sadness or anger. These things can come in response to a situation and again move a situation or help a situation resolve, and then they very quickly are gone again. And again, I experience this sort of background of joy and peace. Now again, I may not look like I'm having that experience, but again, the joy and peace I'm talking about is one that is transcendent of an altered state. Okay, and I want to be very clear about that, because I think people think, oh, if you're experiencing joy and bliss, then you're like shaking and your eyes are closed and you're unconscious and people can't talk to you. That's not my experience. Yes, you can experience a very intense sort of transcendent state like that, which is very nice. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're not careful, what can happen is, again, we start giving preferential treatment to that, and we start ignoring the human experience. And this is one form that spiritual bypassing can come along, where we want to quit our job, we want to go away from all the difficult people, we want to move into an ashram or a monastery and just live in bliss, in this very structured, controlled environment. Now again, hopefully you're beginning to understand control is one of the big things for the ego. So is a monastery away from all civilization, where everyone else there is following very strict rules, is this really the best test of whether or not we've let go of our egoic impulses or not? Is such a controlled environment actually testing whether or not we have fully matured spiritually, whether or not we can live in the real world without control, without boundaries and buffers, and experience this peace, joy, and bliss in that environment? This is very much what this teaching is about, and from my perspective, this is the most advanced type of spirituality that you can practice, okay? It doesn't mean it's the best, because the best is what's appropriate for you. So if this is over your head or under your head or doesn't make any sense to you, then this is probably not the place for you, at least not right now. That doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you shallow, doesn't make you unspiritual. It just means that what I am pointing at right now is not going to be helpful for you. Okay, so that just means look for another teacher, look for something that resonates and makes sense. However, if what I'm teaching makes sense to you, even if there are aspects that you're not quite sure about, or you question, that's okay. In my experience, the teaching is very much about faith, and true faith, as opposed to blind faith. True faith comes from, you hear what I say, and even though you can't explain it and you don't know why, and you're not sure that everything I'm saying is true, something inside you is moving. Okay, something inside you is drawing you into this teaching, listening to this talk, maybe reaching out, asking me a question, or doing a one-on-one session, or learning meditation, any of these things. It's again spontaneous from within us. Spirit moves in response to the teacher, the teaching. And again, I think in my last talk I mentioned how none of this is about being a saint. So if you think you need me to be perfect in whatever that means to you, it's different for everybody, right? If you think you need me to be perfect in order to learn from me, or for me to be a legitimate teacher, then again, you probably want to look elsewhere, because I'm happy to admit I am not perfect. I don't even know what that means anymore, okay? If you were to tell me, what does a perfect human being look like? I have no clue. As far as I'm concerned, they're maybe all perfect. The real question we have to ask is, are you suffering or not? Because then you aren't having the human experience as it was meant to be experienced. Yes, anger, joy, peace, love, fear, all these different things can come and go and arise within awareness. Awareness is not disturbed by any of them. And so if we can hold both the embodied and the transcendent together, we can really enjoy the ride. When we lose one or the other, it becomes imbalanced, and then generally we are starting to experience the suffering that comes along with that. All right, everyone, so I hope that this was helpful. If there are any questions, please reach out. And again, I'm encouraging students more and more to reach out, maybe to do some one-on-one work with me if you think that would be helpful. And there are several different forms that can take depending on where you are with your practices and what you need. And though that is, at least for now, a donation-based process. So, I recommend 125 a session. But if you don't have that or you can't afford that, I'm willing to work with you regardless. Again, I may not be able to continue doing that forever, but right now that's the situation. I don't want the money to be an impediment to you getting the help that you need if you really don't think that you can afford it. So anyway, everyone, again, I want to thank my patrons on Patreon. They make this possible. So if you, again, are one of those people, it's not just me bringing you this, it is them as well. So maybe you can thank them as well in your prayers. Reach out if you need a hand, and I look forward to talking with you next time. Till then, namaste and have a great day.